joining us for the 2024 International Human Rights Day program hosted by the United Nations Association of the USA. We are so glad that you are here. And I am going to turn it over to Kathleen.
Yeah, hi everyone. On International Human Rights Day, we honor the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948, a landmark document that enshrined dignity, equality, and justice for all. Yet, 76 years later, we find ourselves facing more conflicts than at any point since World War II. From conflicts and climate disasters to deepening economic inequalities and displacement, these challenges spare no corner of the globe. Sudan is in the midst of a civil war. Ukraine is being ravaged by conflict. Civilians in Gaza are facing a human rights crisis, and Haitians are dealing with an ever-worsening humanitarian emergency. With crackdowns on dissent and the diminution of civil rights across the globe, it is clear we need a new and diverse set of tools to face our existing challenges. This year's theme, the Universal Periodic Review, calls us to confront these challenges through accountability. The Universal Periodic Review, a mechanism through which each UN member state reviews its human rights record every 4.5 years, fosters accountability and commitment to progress. Every 4.5 years, each UN member state reviews its human rights record and commits to progress. This progress is a powerful reminder that human rights are not fixed. They need to be actively protected, reassessed, and advanced. As a United Nations Association Global Goals Ambassador for SDG 10, focused on reducing inequalities, I've seen firsthand how UNA USA empowers young people to build grassroots power and make our voices heard. Too often, human rights work is seen as distant and even abstract. Instead, it is a profoundly local endeavor that we engage in every single day. And ultimately, we need more local to global pathways that amplify voices, mobilize action, and foster real change. So let today be that reflection. Let it be a call to action to hold our leaders accountable and to create the world we want to see. Engage with organizations like UNA USA. Recognize that human rights are not lofty ideals. They're guiding principles that help us navigate crises and build a more just world. Together, we can ensure that the promise of 1948 isn't disremembered, but instead realized. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this, Kathleen. I loved your statement about the intersectionality and really connecting local to global. I think that that's such an important theme, especially when we think about these broad human rights goals and how they affect all of us on the local and individual level and how they mean so much to each of us when we think about their impact. So my name is Rory Munshine, and I am a Global Goals Ambassador for SDG 10, where I'm focused on reducing inequalities. And what I love about SDG 10 is that it's really focused on this intersectionality between all of the SDGs. It's focused on inequality as it relates to poverty, inequality as it relates to hunger, inequality as it relates to gender justice, and so much more. So I think that's such a cross-cutting theme. And so now I have the pleasure of introducing the London Bell and Rachel Moynihan, who are going to be facilitating a fireside chat on gender justice, which I think is an incredibly important theme as we think about Human Rights Day. London Bell is one of my colleagues for the SDG 10 Global Goals Ambassador role, and Rachel is going to also be facilitating this conversation as well. So I'm going to pass it over to them, and they're going to introduce themselves more broadly. Rachel, London, over to you.
I am actually two new faces in lieu of London and Rachel Moynihan are going to pop on your screen, and that is myself and the very highly esteemed good friend to UNA USA, Sarah Craven. So Sarah, thank you so much for joining us today. And I know that you were dipping out of a very important retreat to come and to speak to our members and our supporters writ large. So thank you, first of all. And you can see Sarah's title is on the screen, but let me just say that Sarah knows everything. Okay, close to everything about women's sexual and reproductive health as it relates to the intersection between the US and the UN. So that is why we thought it was so important to have her as a representative of UNFPA to come today to talk about human rights from that standpoint. So Sarah, I know we have a very short time together. In fact, we only have 14 minutes together. So I was thinking, if it's okay with you and with everyone, if we have 10 minutes, I have some questions I'd like to throw at you. And then if we have time, maybe squeeze in a couple of questions from the audience, if that's okay.
Sure. Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Thank you, Sarah. So let's softly tee it up. What does this day mean to you, Sarah? You've been doing this work for you are a human rights defender. So happy post Human Rights Defender Day from December 9th, yesterday. So what does it mean to you? You're in a difficult space. How do you continue on each and every day? And what does this day look like for UNFPA as well?
Well, thank you so much, Farah, and thank you everyone for having me join you today. Today's an incredibly important day for me. I actually, you can't see it. I have a quarter here. It's my lucky quarter. And on it is, this quarter honors Representative Patsy Mink, who was one of the first Asian American members of Congress, who has also worked for the UN. She worked on the Law of the Sea Treaty, and it was somebody who I met when I was about 10 years old. And that was who kind of launched my interest in, whether I knew it or not, about being an advocate with the idea that women can lead and that women can lead on things that they believe strongly and deeply about. And Representative Mink was someone who was such a leader and champion for women and girls in all that she did. So they issued a quarter for her this year. I try to give, I'm going to give you one, Farah, next time I see you. I try to give out because I'm trying to spread Patsy Mink's legacy everywhere. And so today for me is such an exciting day because it is a day where we can take a moment and really reflect on the importance of the work of human rights defenders, the importance of the SDGs. I love everyone picking their SDG that they're going to advocate for. I think we all should have one that's in our back pocket. And for me at UNFPA, we are probably going to, in our 10 minutes, get into some of the challenges we face right now. But I think for me, nothing changes every day for us at UNFPA in terms of what we're the mandate that we have, which is the 30-year program of action that was agreed to by 197 countries in Cairo, Egypt, 30 years ago, which has fundamentally at its core the idea that every individual has the right to freely and voluntarily determine their family size and have the means to do so. And central to that is the empowerment of women and girls, that when women and girls have opportunities for education, for political involvement, for economic opportunity, to be able to have bodily autonomy, all of these decisions that they make about themselves support them as individuals, support their families, support the communities, and by extension, support the world. So for us to have a day and to have this quick conversation on the centrality and importance of that I welcome it. Thank you.
Yeah, Sarah, I'm really looking forward. I actually took down her name, Patsy Mink. That's someone for us to also highlight in our communication. So thank you. And I look forward to the quarter. So, you touched on this a little bit, Sarah, in terms of the challenges UNFPA faces. Perhaps some of our guests are aware that UNFPA has been in the spotlight sometimes as it relates to funding and US governmental support for UNFPA. But what would you say are the most pressing challenges? How do you explain this to people who are not in this space necessarily? And then, I was hoping that we could maybe pick out a few. There's unfortunately so many crises that are happening right now, whether that's, of course, just we saw what happened in Syria just a couple of days ago. There's Gaza, Iraq, Afghanistan, Haiti. Sudan, if you would be able to kind of layer in UNFPA's work in one of those contexts, that would be very helpful.
Sure, Farah. Well, just quickly to have a second, all of you are seasoned UN advocates and UN watchers and UN folk, but we tend to talk a lot in acronyms, so I hope I don't do that too much. But just to say that UNFPA has 3 transformative results that we're trying to achieve, and we call them the 3 zeros. So we want to see a world where there is 0 unmet need for family planning or contraception, i.e. anyone who would like to have access to the ability to plan and space a family should have that means. Our second transformative goal is to end all preventable maternal death. Unfortunately, because of some of the issues I'm going to talk about, we know what to do to keep women and babies safe, healthy, and alive. But unfortunately, because often due to rural areas, lack of trained help, or even political will, too many women die from preventable causes of maternal mortality, and we want to end that. And then our third transformative result is we want to see a world with no gender-based violence. And under that, we include harmful traditional practices such as ending female genital mutilation and ending early forced or child marriage. What does that all have in common is that a lot of this is some of the most intimate, personal decisions that anyone makes: who to have a family with, who to have a sexual relationship with, decisions made around your body when you enter adolescence with these harmful practices. And so we have issues that are in any culture, deeply sensitive, involved in culture and politics. And unfortunately, these become political as opposed to the healthcare or the rights-based decisions as the way we want to see them. So that's kind of the crux of it. We are so grateful for the support of the United States government. They've been an incredible partner to us. We get robust funding from the Biden-Harris administration, and we also have partnership with them, particularly those issues that I'm discussing happen in a development context, but they also help it happen in a humanitarian or fragile context. So imagine you are a young girl in Gaza, or you are a young woman in Ukraine or Yemen. These issues are happening to you, and yet at the same time, there's also conflict going. And unfortunately, the needs of women and girls are often not prioritized either in policy or in funding. They're sometimes the last focused of issues. So UNFPA tries to focus on that in those conflict-based settings. So for example, a few days ago, the UN overall launched their humanitarian appeals for the year. UNFPA also launched our humanitarian appeal, where we really highlight and focus on many of the countries that you're talking about. One of the stories that's part of that appeal that everyone on this call can go to our website and read in more detail. There's some really beautiful visuals that we have on there, is a young woman in Gaza who at 28 had a wanted planned pregnancy, but 4 times has had herself displaced. Suddenly she had she went into labor a month before she was supposed to give birth, and there was no facility where she could safely deliver birth. Fortunately, this is a happy story because with the support of UNFPA, again, with partnership with the US government, we were able to give her a cash voucher, which enabled her to get to a UNFPA-sponsored hospital. She had a safe delivery. Her infant was put in an incubator. She's gotten the care that she needed, and she also has some money in her pocket to pay for essentials such as diapers. These are things that are extraordinarily expensive. One of the statistics in this piece that is on our website talks about how in normal times it might cost $1 for her to take a form of local transportation to get to a health center. It now costs $10. And when you are living on a very reduced budget under a conflict setting, these are costs that can become prohibitive and then have the impact on a young mother like this who is trying to get the health care that all of us rely on as our right here. So this is not these are issues, as I say, that are life and death for women and their families, and don't require, I always say, we don't require a cure. We don't require a huge silver bullet to address it. We just require the political will that we're going to prioritize that no woman should die giving birth. No young girl should get married before she is ready. No young girl should leave school before she is ready to have the education that her brother might have. And so this is the work of UNFPA, and unfortunately, it sometimes gets politicized, and we are we work every day to try to tell the real story.
Yes, absolutely. And hopefully you know that UNA USA members and supporters are true champions of UNFPA to try to ensure that the correct and accurate story is told. And Sarah, I really appreciate you sharing that that kind of vignette of the woman in Gaza, because it really brings to life what some of the services, or what UNFPA really does offer as far as programs and services. And talking about what you offer, it may be, I know for some students and younger people, and some not younger people, they were surprised to learn that there is a UNFPA office based outside of New York. And
Mm.
so I think that would be really interesting, if you wouldn't mind, especially because you are the head of the North America office, to talk a little bit about, how does the Washington-based North America office work with people like us, champions, advocates, etc., who support and who really truly believe that women's access to women's sexual and reproductive health is a true right. So what does that look like? How can maybe the average American see the work of UNFPA and support it?
Oh, thank you so much, Farah. Yeah, some people might say we're mighty small. I say we're small and mighty. Our team here in Washington, there's 4 of us, and I think I have one of the best jobs I could even imagine. My job is, I often say I'm a UN translator. I'm translating the work of UNFPA to policymakers, whether it's members of Congress, the US administration. I also engage with private sector partners, individuals, civil society, and American public, everywhere I can to tell the story of UNFPA's work and to gain support, whether it's political support, financial support, technical support, because we are a small agency and we're never going to be effective if we do things on our own. We always, wherever we do, whether it's at the country level, we work in partnership or collaboration, or here in a very, resource-rich area like Washington, D.C., we see all of the ways that we can engage and partner to try to bring voice, agency, and support to the world's most marginalized women and girls. A few years ago, we went from the Washington office to being the North American office because we also have the same mandate with Canada. And so we work with the Canadian government, who have been also very strong supporters and champions. Love to have visitors. So if you're in Washington, D.C., we'd love to have you come here. And one thing we love to do is when UNA does their annual summit, we love to be part of that. And I always make sure that our summer interns are part of that process when you all go to Capitol Hill to tell the story about the work the UN does around the world. So I always appreciate that opportunity to be part of that.
And we look forward to welcoming you again sometime in June of 2025. So thank you. I'm just keeping track of the time. So I'm gonna let us open up for a question. But before I do, I like to end on happy notes. So Sarah, what would you say is a win? I mean, right now, perhaps some people are feeling that women's rights are not as robust as maybe they would like. So what would you say is perhaps a win within this realm, within the women's sexual and reproductive health space, and maybe that you didn't even think would result in a positive outcome?
I hope I say this is a win. I think this is a win, although it's going to have a moment. But when there was a transition from the Obama administration to the first Trump administration, we were at our all-time highest funding level with the US, which was about $80 million. And which, if you compare that to a larger agency, that's not that much, but for us, that's huge. Now, right now in 2024, currently, we're getting over $300 million from the United States government, and the US is our largest overall donor and provides 40% of our support for humanitarian assistance. So I will say that's a huge win, and that's a huge
Yes.
amount of partnership and commitment from the US government in the space of reproductive health in crisis settings. So I'm going to celebrate that moment, even though it feels like we're on a bit of a cliff, because that probably will not continue when things change into the new administration. So it shows the possibility that you can get through all the kind of partnership I talk about, this extraordinary result, and then also the peril of changes in political leadership can then put that that amazing support into a different light.
Absolutely. Let's continue to celebrate while we can. Wonderful. So I'm seeing, how do you, sorry, audience question. How do you suggest local chapters expand to incorporate more local global pathways, supporting Haiti, Gaza, women in crises, etc.? So maybe, Sarah, I think, as you know, we have over 250 chapters across the country, both on campuses and in communities. So do you have any thoughts in terms of, from a UNFPA lens, how chapters may also become involved with supporting women's rights and women's sexual and reproductive health?
Sure. Well, one is that wonderful coming to events like this and then spreading the word of like what you heard and what you learned and bringing more people involved. I think a lot of this is storytelling, and a lot of this is knowing that people can make an absolute difference. Of course, we always say that some of that difference is supporting it financially, but it's also like sharing with others and letting people know. So I was at a big fancy Washington dinner this past week where a unnamed senator was on the stage, and he said that he was a big champion for these issues, but that he never heard from any of his constituents. So to me, a very simple thing you can do is let your policymakers know, have letter writing parties to let them know how much you support this work, because if they need to hear that, then you are a great way of being able to say, hey, to the people who are your elected officials, I care about the work, global work, and I want you to continue to support that. So he opened the door, and I thought, I bet I can know a lot of people who might be able to write some letters so he doesn't feel so lonely and letterless. So that would be something that I think is a very easy thing to do, and you can get others to join you, have a letter writing party.
I love it. Yes. And we will definitely have a chance even later on in this call for contacting elected officials about human rights. So we will certainly work on that, Sarah. Maybe what innovative approaches can be implemented to provide alternative educational opportunities for women in regions where formal education is restricted, ensuring long-term empowerment and skill building?
Well, that's an incredible question. Back I was saying we just had our release of our humanitarian appeal, and another one of the stories that was highlighted is in Yemen, where again, there have been under fragile context situation where everyone has been quite displaced, and particularly women and girls. Many women and girls have not been able to go to school. They have these limited settings. And so there has been an opportunity to use online ways to provide education. But in this particular story that's highlighted again on our website, these women and girls then became subject to, and this is a big acronym here, technology facilitated gender-based violence, when women and girls are suddenly harassed for being online. And then this has a rippling effect where they don't want to feel safe online. Where we have the promise to have more education when they're not able to go to school, and then you have this situation. So what UNFPA is working on is addressing that to make online safety a place for women and girls, and also to have areas where women and girls who can come together in community, in psychosocial safety spots where they are able to learn together, work together, and continue their education, maybe not in the formal school while there is a moment of displacement. So that's some of the kind of work that we do to provide safe spaces, both physical safe spaces, and then also online safe spaces, so where women can continue to contribute and learn.
Thank you, Sarah. And I feel like we should have renamed this part instead of fireside chat, rapid fire questions, because the time went by so quickly. But a big round of applause for Sarah Craven, who is the chief of UNFPA's North American Representative Office. Thank you so much, Sarah, for stepping out of your retreat.
Thank you for having me.
Bye-bye. And I will turn it over to Rory. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I actually really enjoyed that session. I think that that focused so much on the themes of Human Rights Day as it relates to like maternal care, as it relates to gender, as it relates to like thinking about like some of the debates that we're having in the USA, and also about how we can take action as individual members, because oftentimes we do feel powerless. This shows that, you know, you can write to your elected officials, you can engage with them and have conversations about these different issues so that you can, you know, gain a more diverse perspective and help them know how to better serve you. So I really appreciate that. And so now I'm going to take it over to Josh Cooper, who's going to give us a session on the Universal Periodic Review. So Josh Cooper balances academia and advocacy, focusing on international human rights law through diplomacy and direct action. He persuades passionately and pressures persistently in global human rights mechanisms with intensity and intellect. He's an educator with over a decade of experience teaching at numerous higher education institutions in Hawaii. He has developed curriculum in over 40 courses in political science to focus on core themes of nonviolence, ecology, human rights, and social justice. He's taught over 100 classes at the University of Hawaii. So I think that he is the perfect person to tell us all about the Universal Periodic Review and what that means. Josh, over to you.
Aloha, thank you so much. And it's an honor to be with everyone. And just building on what Sarah shared, I just want to thank her for bringing up Patsy Mink. I'm here calling from the Office of the Mayor as Chief Sustainability Officer, and this is where Patsy Mink is actually from. I remember when first teaching at University of Hawaii at the Maui College, when she had passed, we actually had a giant ceremony for her just down the road at the high school, but at very much as a UNA member, actually lobbied and met her multiple times to have the easiest meetings ever on Capitol Hill because she was a champion. So it's great to have that with Sarah in the beginning. Really appreciate you sharing that. Oh, it's great you grew up in Honolulu. I grew up in Waianae and still very much love being home in Hawaii and look forward to definitely visiting you on our next visit in June at our summit. So thank you so much for starting with Patsy Mink, because I think what it does is really connect everything. And that's why we're here. And you really bring it from the womb to the tomb of how the UN and human rights is really at the core. So as we honor Eleanor Roosevelt today and her message of bringing human rights home, I thought I'd really look at sustainable development goals and good governance and utilizing the Universal Periodic Review to achieve all the articles in the UDHR. And what's so exciting is what we're kicking off today is really a 11-month campaign. The United States of America will have its 4th Universal Periodic Review on November 10th of 2025. So we're kicking it off today, honoring all the work of Eleanor Roosevelt, Franklin Delano Roosevelt's 4 freedom speech, of freedom from fear, freedom from want, freedom of speech, and freedom of worship, by giving this speech to share together how we can all be active in making sure that we can achieve every article of the UDHR. The Universal Periodic Review is so exciting because it looks at all human rights. It looks at anything in the UN Charter, which of course was drafted in San Francisco, where human rights is mentioned 6 times, plus self-determination. It mentions anything in the UDHR, that's civil and political rights, plus economic, social, and cultural rights, which is great. And then the other amazing part is anything the US has ratified, which we have ratified 3, looking at ICCPR on civil and political rights, the important aspect of the 3rd, looking at the elimination of racial discrimination, and also very important, the Convention Against Torture. But we've also accepted the optional protocol looking at children's rights, and the US will actually be reviewed before our actual UPR in November. So what we can look at and what we can do is each chapter plus each individual is, what do you care about? What is wrong that we see that our chapters operate in our communities? But also, more importantly, what do we want? So we're asking you to look from the classroom to the community, to City Hall, to the state capitals, to our nation's capital, and to global civil society and the UN Human Rights Council. What can we do at each phase? And there's 5 simple phases that we can be involved in, and it makes it bite-sized. So it's nothing too much. It's easy ways you can be involved. And the first phase is the preparation. That is from now, December 10th, until April 7th. In that time, we can join together and work in our chapters to draft shadow reports or stakeholder reports that outline the issue that we care about, linked to an article, the very important aspect of questions that we want posed to our government, and I believe there'll be many, as you can see, and most importantly, recommendations. And that's getting at beyond what's wrong, but what we really want, sharing that recommendation, because we know where we live and what our experiences are, our joint experiences, what needs to change and how that should be done. So during this phase of December 10th through April 7th, there's multiple things that we can do. And we're looking at coordinating through the Human Rights Affinity Group, a great campaign on What's Your Dream on Martin Luther King Day to bring everybody back after the holiday time to share and to start this conversation. And then on Valentine's Day, so what do you love about human rights, to get everybody's perspective and using creative social media. And then for International Women's Day in March, one last chance, because I think what Sarah brought up is really it all begins with mom. It begins with that life and where we're at and what we can do and how we can coordinate. And so we'll do Women's Day and begin with that aspect from birth and what's most important. And what's exciting then is we'll turn in that report. We'll draft that together with the human rights experts to share what we care about most. And I love the way Sarah put it, that we're translators. We're really the bridge builders. Everyone knows what their rights are. But what we're trying to do is share this UN process to make sure that we can utilize it to really, since it's near lunchtime, make a state sandwich. And from the grassroots, sort of push up what we care about, what matters most, and make sure it's heard. And using the global level, this universal periodic review that reviews all countries in the world, to sort of press and make a panini sandwich for peace and human rights in our nation. And so that we squeeze out the truth, and we know we can do that together. So in that first phase of preparation, what we were sharing was one little event each month, but then we're going to create that together. And that's drafting a report. And then the good news is that's submitted to the UN. That'll be on the UN OHCHR, Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights website that everyone can look at for time immemorial, and your work is embodied there. So anything you do, anything you write, it'll be there. So we encourage that. The other side, though, is many people do different things. You can actually we've done video contests, so you can make videos that express what you care about. The interaction phase, starting from April 7th until really November 9th, what that is exciting, because we're going to talk with governments and share with them. So we'll meet with governments in DC, at the embassies. We'll meet with missions in New York and Geneva and share your message with them and coordinate that. But also in a new level, we're going to organize where we have consulates across the United States, in Honolulu, in San Francisco, in Boston, Atlanta, connect with those consulate generals and talk with them. Because what's important is in the third phase, which is the consideration, that's when the questions and recommendations are posed to the US government. And last time there were over 300 recommendations. In the last 3 UPRs, there's been over 300 recommendations each time. And I'm pretty sure with the way we see the world today, we'll definitely peak 300, if not 400. And those should be your ideas. Those should be your initiatives you're asking for to shape institutions. So that will be very exciting. So in that space from April through November 9th, we will be able to reach out and meet with governments and coordinate that through UNA USA and work together. And the consideration is exciting. That is exciting, as I'll wrap up, because in 3.5 hours, we see what the results are from the great work we've done. Your question, your recommendation will be heard. And more importantly, you'll get to hear your recommendation said by a country from around the world that also cares about your issue. Then we get into the adoption, which will be in 2026 at the Human Rights Council in February, March. But most important is that 5th phase of implementation. And that's when we take all the recommendations and sort of make a recipe book for a moral revolution, and we're able to make the world better. And this really is exciting because it's the 5 years to the end of the SDGs. And so it's a chance for us to bring sustainable development, self-determination, all these issues together to make sure that the UPR is a process that really ignites a flame for peace and justice for all of us. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Josh. I actually really love that. And I think that it was great that you supplemented what you were discussing with actionable events for all the UNA USA members. So I really loved that. I loved that you were talking about MLK Day, having a dream, the Valentine's Day thing with what do you love about human rights? I think that's such a creative way to really market human rights and get people more excited about it, and how you're tailoring all of these events to essentially participate in the UPR process as well. I think that's very cool. And I didn't actually know as much as you did about the ways in which you can actually get involved with the UPR. And I think it's very cool that you're facilitating opportunities for our members. So thank you so much for that. Now I'm going to transition over to a conversation about climate and human rights, because we're focusing on this intersectionality. We're focusing on human rights in general, and like, what are some of the different sub themes about human rights? And so I'm going to turn it over to Gabriel Nagel, who is a leading figure in climate justice advocacy, and he is the chairperson of the EPA's Environmental Youth Council and UNA USA's Global Goals Ambassador for Climate Action. He founded the nonprofit Light CO2, notable for its carbon tracking app and planting over 10,000 trees. He also pioneered a historical environmental justice policy in 200 schools, which impacted 92,000 students. His engagement extends to NPR, the UN, and discussions on climate anxiety with Vice President Kamala Harris. He is a recipient of the President's Environmental Youth Award, which reaffirms his commitments to global climate action and justice. So that's a very cool and incredible resume, and I'm so excited to introduce him to talk about climate and human rights. Gabriel, over to you.
Thank you so much. And wonderful presentation too by Joshua. So I'll just get started here and give a little bit about my journey on how I got started in the climate space overall. So I got started, back in middle school when I was quite young. I had learned about the climate crisis. And, if you could just go to the next slide here. So I had grown up in Colorado. Sorry, one more slide. Grown up in Colorado. And in Colorado, I had the chance to really be surrounded by nature, always having access to go out and explore the outdoors through regular camping trips with our school. And it really wasn't something that I had thought of. I didn't know of climate change, but that all started to change. In around 7th grade, if you could go to the next slide, just 2 more. Yeah, 1 more. So around 7th grade, I first learned about the climate crisis. I remember seeing this graph, seeing the correlation between global temperature rise and CO2 levels. So this was really something undeniable. I saw it as many kids are introduced to the climate crisis now, seeing this correlation between temperatures and emissions. And, it doesn't look good from this picture, but it's much different seeing an issue on paper and understanding it through data versus experiencing it in real life. So then in the summer of 2019, if you go to the next slide, I was actually evacuated by a wildfire when I was living in Boulder. In that moment, I'd realized that climate change wasn't something of the future, but it was something of the present with an immediate urgency. And while I was fortunate enough, and my family was fortunate enough to make it out of that fire safely, other neighbors were not so lucky. And I began recognizing that a lot of people around the United States and the world were facing even worse impacts of climate change. Next. So one of those issues that we're facing is natural disasters. We're seeing natural disasters increase in frequency and intensity, like that wildfire that evacuated me in Colorado, but it's also having devastating consequences across a lot of different areas. Next. So for instance, climate change is leading to increased sea level rise, air pollution, population displacement, biodiversity loss, ecosystem disruption, disease spread, the list goes on. And all of these issues, as you might imagine, are critical to human rights. While the richest 1% of the global population has been responsible for 15% of cumulative carbon emissions from 1990 to 2015, that's double that of the poorest 50% of the world, which contributed just 7%. And beyond that, it's also individuals in developing and poor countries who are bearing the brunts of climate change. In fact, climate change is already linked to approximately 150,000 premature deaths annually. And in 2022, around 32 million people were displaced by weather-related hazards like those natural disasters, with projections going up to 1.2 billion by 2050. So this is a really pressing concern for human rights, and it becomes critical that we start to take action. Next slide. So I began my journey, as a lot of students did in my community, which was going out on the streets and protesting, demanding civic action and accountability by our government leaders in Denver and Colorado to take actions to reduce these natural disasters and make bolder climate impacts. But I realized that taking it out onto the streets and just sharing these concerns wasn't just enough. We needed to have real policy impacts. Next. So now I'll get into a little bit of my impact that I've had throughout the past few years in climate. Next. So one of the most substantial things that I had the chance to work on was after recognizing the severity of the climate crisis, I worked directly with leaders in my school district to pass a climate justice policy. What's unique about a climate justice policy is that it doesn't just focus on specifics such as emission reduction or 100% clean electricity by 2050, but actually how you can address a lot of the underlying environmental justice concerns associated with climate. So that included things like rerouting buses to reduce air pollution inequality in certain communities and ensuring food sustainability and access within schools, primarily in communities that faced food deserts. So this is a growing shift in the climate conversation, and one that I think is really critical when we think of climate in conjunction with human rights, is how do we tie together uplifting human dignity and human respect in line with making bold climate targets, because the two are not mutually exclusive. So next slide. After this policy passed, it had a substantial impact across our school district and started gaining international recognition by Vice President Kamala Harris, as previously mentioned, and also other communities who were starting to take similar actions. So I think this goes to show one of the key lessons that I was beginning to learn, which is that you could really expand your action collectively. Next. So I had the chance then to share this journey with UNA USA and the Global Engagement Summit, speaking again about climate. Next, and also working at a larger international level on the National Environmental Youth Advisory Council. So that's the Environmental Protection Agency's new youth advisory council targeted around climate. And as we think about that, it's actually important to note that the United States is one of the only countries who has a youth advisory council, the other few being Canada and also Denmark. So it's really critical that we start getting more youth representation in climate and these broader issues, because oftentimes it's youth who are bearing the brunt of these crises, along with individuals in developing countries and also disadvantaged communities due to environmental justice concerns. Next. So as I mentioned earlier too, I've had the chance to expand this journey and share what I have learned, which is now where I'll start getting into the key lessons that I believe you can start applying in your journey for climate and human rights. Next. Next. So one of the first key lessons that I learned was persistence. So throughout the whole process of working on passing that climate justice policy, it took almost 2 years and attending almost monthly board meetings of our school board, getting a petition together with over 4,000 signatures, and also taking substantial action to work directly with board members to get their support. I think this is something that we're seeing through UNA USA. For instance, with the new UN Youth Declaration of Human Rights, the signature campaign for that is a significant step that we could take to start raising awareness around human rights. But then also it takes the next step of implementing that in policy changes or local actions that you create in your community. Next. So the second lesson that I learned aside from persistence was the importance of adaptability. Throughout the process of working on the policy in my school district, we actually had to change a lot, adapting to the school board, changing their governance model from a resolution-based model to policy-based models. And it also was about meeting direct concerns. So as we were working through the different parts of our climate justice policy, we recognized that certain elements might have been too ambitious around carbon emissions targets that could then come to cost and human cost to individuals who were more disadvantaged in our community. So it's important to always see the trade-offs that you're making. And then next, finally, I think the most important lesson is about collaboration. I think UNA USA is a great platform for this, especially through groups like the Human Rights Affinity Group, where you could work together with others to expand that journey. Next. So what I want to end on is the fact that, while many of us may be seeing a lot of crises, especially the climate crisis, through a lot of data, we're seeing rising emissions. We can constantly hear about the 1.5 degrees Celsius targets that we're trying to reach. We often forget about the human costs of those crises. And I think that's something important to keep front of mind, front and center as we work throughout those journeys. So I think that, through UNA USA already, I'm president of the Stanford chapter. We're making substantial efforts locally, and I think you can too. Just remember those lessons of persistence, adaptability, and collaboration. And together, I think we can work to elevate both climate change and making significant strides against it, and also human rights together. Thank you so much.
Gabriel, I really love this conversation too, because you took your personal experience and you leveraged it to be able to drive action, and you were able to find other people and get them to organize as well. And I think that that's so important, is taking your lived experience and connecting it to the work of the UN and really finding a way to localize the SDGs and thinking about those themes of resilience and adaptability, as well as things that we can all take away from this talk and how we can apply that into our own. So yes, next I want to talk with Amy Bryant, who is going to be focusing on the ways in which human rights intersect with LGBT rights in a flash talk. So I'm going to be giving an introduction to Amy, and then I'm going to take it over to them. Amy Bryant holds a Master's of Social Work and is the UNA USA's National Council representative for the Rocky Mountain region. Amy has a background in policy advocacy, community and stakeholder engagement with project development and management. They have worked with the UN and NGOs to advocate for refugees, racial justice, LGBTQI persons, and women's rights, and has worked on the local, national, and international levels. Their research was included in the UN report on colonialism and its impacts on LGBTQI+ individuals, and was presented at the 78th UN General Assembly. They were a UNA USA delegate for the UN Commission on the Status of Women, and in the 66th and 68th sessions. And in this, Amy lobbied member states and non-governmental organizations to implement policies to advance gender equity. They experienced homelessness as a child, and as a result, they are passionate about human and refugee rights advocacy and collaborating with marginalized groups to build equity through coalition building and expanding opportunities. I'm super excited to be introducing Amy and letting them go over the intersection between human rights and LGBTQI advocacy. Amy, over to you.
Hey, thanks, Rory. I'm Amy, and my pronouns are they, them. And I would like to talk about human rights and LGBTQ issues and how it intersects with online digital spaces. So what I like to talk about is a term called stochastic terrorism. And some of you may not have heard that term. It's basically, it's publicly demonizing a person or a group and inspiring their supporters to commit violent acts against the target of the speech. This is done using indirect, vague, coded language, and allows the instigator to publicly disclaim responsibility for the resulting violence. So I liken it to, pushing people right to the edge of violence with misinformation and disinformation. And it only really takes us the slightest breeze to push them over and act. And unfortunately, we're seeing rates of harassment of LGBTQ folks and other vulnerable populations increasing online, especially since the pandemic. So 87% of LGBTQ youth report experiencing online hate and harassment. And this is serious for a myriad of reasons. One is that youth and many other folks spend a lot of time in the digital space, in the digital sphere. And this harassment leads to depression, anxiety, feelings of isolation, and unfortunately, suicidal ideation. So this is a very serious issue. LGBTQ activists are targeted for their sexual orientation and gender expression. And what this does is these spaces where people are sharing misinformation, disinformation, it's an echo chamber effect. So it's these facts keep getting spread to eventually it becomes real in a person's mind. And it's very hard to counteract, unfortunately. So some of the trends that we're seeing for LGBTQ folks is harassment due to political involvement, particularly advocacy and advocating for their human rights, is on the rise. They're facing harassment for speaking about or on behalf of LGBTQIA rights. And this is really meant to silence folks and pressure them into not having an online presence, which unfortunately then their voice, the voice of reason, withdraws from those spaces, and then it reinforces the online harassment, again, like the echo chamber effect that I mentioned earlier. So the impacts on this are unfortunately under-researched. So there's opportunities that can be done around, how this affects folks who are the target of this online hate speech and violence. So, individuals report reducing their engagement online to avoid these attacks. These attacks often get very personal. Unfortunately, because of my gender identity, sexual orientation, I have been the target of some of those attacks. And this, significantly impacts folks wanting to stay in that digital space. And, so much of our world is online now. They miss out on opportunities like future job opportunities and their ability to advocate and participate politically online. And then it also affects their feelings of safety. So with stochastic terrorism, even though it's on the digital sphere, it has very real effects offline. So I would say the online hate becomes offline hate. So just a few examples. So, just to tee up this portion, white supremacists have committed the majority of domestic extremist related killings in the United States. And the influence of the internet and fostering these white supremacist ideas really can't be underestimated. They're reinforced and celebrated, unfortunately. So one of the biggest sources of this stochastic terrorism comes from a social media account movement called Libs of TikTok. And this is a social media account started by Chaya Raichek. And they have made direct accusations about LGBTQ individuals grooming and recruiting youth and post misinformation and disinformation about the LGBTQ community, which is then followed by real world threat, harassment, and doxing. For folks who don't know what the term doxing means, it's basically taking finding somebody's personal information, like their address, for instance, and publishing it online, or themselves going to a person's home and harassing them. So it's very real offline issue. So Libs of TikTok is linked to the Proud Boys. Some of you may have heard about this group. It's a far right nationalist group who have and do use threats and intimidation after Libs of TikTok social media accounts post about drag performances, things like children's story hours featuring drag performers. So for instance, just a few examples is Libs of TikTok published the names of 222 educators and schools and educational organizations, encouraging followers to target these individuals and harass them, or any entity who discusses LGBTQ topics that they label propaganda. So I just want to stop there for a minute because this language that we're hearing, grooming, recruiting, LGBTQ propaganda, this is, these terms were used, unfortunately, in a lot of autocratic government, particularly during World War II, by the Nazis. So with TikTok, of course, the post predated threats, to schools, libraries, any person or entity that provokes LGBTQ positivity and information. So one instance is they misrepresented a post about a school librarian and the LGBTQ literature available at her school, which resulted in multiple bomb threats. So one of the threats stated, "You will stop publishing this woke ideology, or we will bomb every school in the district." They also, Proud Boys has also shown up to drag hours and disrupted them. Unfortunately, of course, with a drag story hour, there's children and their families there. So that's very traumatic for folks who find themselves in that situation. And it just kind of shows that protection of children, which is what they hide behind. We have to protect children from LGBTQ people, isn't really the goal of these extremist actions. They're basically a vehicle, a Trojan horse, if you will, because it happens in stages, right? They want to protect children. Well, who doesn't want to protect children? But then it gets more and more, extreme until we're, unfortunately left with these bomb threats. And I'd also like to talk about these disinformation campaigns are a threat to national security. So this disinformation, misinformation, harassment, they're a threat to national security because foreign actors use it to exploit divisions in society and start these culture wars. So historically and unfortunately today, the autocratic leaders use homophobia and transphobia to connect with voters who are threatened. They feel threatened by LGBTQ rights. One such example was Russian campaigns to undermine foreign elections. So since the invasion of Ukraine, Russian misinformation is often linked to LGBTQ narratives, and they're visibly spread on social media. And then social media accounts active in spreading these hate campaigns align themselves publicly in support of Russian President Vladimir Putin. So I mentioned there's a rise in online extremism targeting LGBTQ folks. Again, anything going from drag shows. We saw in Columbus, Ohio, Nazis with swastika flags disrupted a drag show charity event. A neo-Nazi threw a Molotov cocktail at a church because it had a drag story hour. So again, this is not just online hate, it's the spark igniting violence against the LGBTQ community and many other communities in the real world. So the impact of anti-trans online speech is becoming concrete as lawmakers are introducing and enacting legislation targeting trans people, especially youth, using language such as biological males, biological boys, mirroring what we see online with this stochastic terrorism. So this can result in bans for youth getting gender affirming care, which is a very serious issue. Gender affirming care has proved to be safe and effective in lowering rates of depression and anxiety, to be able to align their bodies with their gender identity. And right now there is a Supreme Court case regarding youth in gender affirming care. And I would encourage you all to follow it if possible. So some of the remedies to counter online extremism and support victims of violence is hate speech laws. So we have to be very careful as to what is classified as hate speech, because that can be exploited to silence marginalized populations. I'm happy to say that the UN is taking on this issue. They are currently working on a code of conduct for the internet. So that would be information integrity on digital platforms, outlines potential guardrails while safeguarding rights to freedom of expression and information. And then governments and tech companies, other stakeholders, need to refrain from using, supporting, or amplifying disinformation or hate speech, because they often have a lot of followers. So that sort of thing can take off like wildfire and have an effect in the real world. And advertisers and digital platforms need to ensure that ads are not placed next to online misinformation and disinformation, hate speech, and that ads containing disinformation are promoted. So as far as a civic response, and then this kind of goes into, what we can do as UNA USA members and advocates is, holding tech companies like Twitter, Facebook, and other platforms, holding them to putting protections in place. So, they need terms and conditions for using, banning hate speech and harassment, and they need to consistently enforce these terms and conditions through blocking or banning users from site. So some of the challenges are to this are creating fake accounts or bots that make they do really spread a lot of the online hate and extremism. So these digital platforms need to strengthen user verification, audit how many bots there are, and address the low hurdles to account creation. And unfortunately, many tech companies are reluctant to take action on this issue because fake stories and harassment spread via user-generated content. It drives engagement, and engagement is where it's at because it creates revenues and profit. So it doesn't make a difference between if content is good or bad or true or false. Interacting with these posts, posting, sharing, commenting, liking, tweeting, this yields behavioral and demographic data. So that's packaged and sold, repackaged and resold. So it's basically a perpetual money-making machine. And then hateful or false representations are easily converted into analytical behavior and ad sales. So potentially, this is more lucrative and decentralizes these tech platforms for removing content. So we really need to hold in civil society and as UNA USA members to hold tech companies liable for this content. And since this violence has a financial incentive, we need to de-incentivize it.
Oh, Amy, I'm so sorry to interrupt. I've just been notified that we're running a little bit over time.
Okay.
I'm not sure if you wanted to say a final closing remark, but I've been asked to give the closing remarks to our event whenever you're ready.
Yeah, sure. So I was just going to go over opportunities really quick. Lobbying elected officials, whether individually or as a chapter, to enact legislative frameworks to be able to stop this violence, and then to demand that governments partner with social media platforms to improve online safety.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Amy. It's very distressing to hear about all of the hate campaigns that are going on, but thank you so much for highlighting, ways of fighting back and promoting love. So moving forward, hi everyone. I will briefly introduce myself. I'm Kate Mallory, and I am the 2023 to 2025 co-chair for the UNA USA Human Rights Affinity Group. Thank you all so much for joining us today and for participating in important discussions about human rights. I'm honored to join you today and provide our closing remarks for this evening's productive discussion. So to start, it's especially important to protect women's rights, human rights during the climate crisis, and LGBTQ+ rights during this time. There are several challenges to defending these rights, as our speakers have noted, but there is also no shortage of human rights defenders doing admirable work to shape a safer world. The Human Rights Affinity Group is inspired by your dedication to the defense of these rights, and we are honored to have so many inspiring people in the UNA USA community and our affinity group. Thank you to Sarah, Farah, Rory, Amy, Kathleen, Joshua, and Gabriel for your wonderful remarks and your dedication to the human rights movement and humanitarian principles. You've done such amazing work in this area. And finally, I'd like to mention an exciting opportunity coming up. The Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, or the OHCHR, is partnering with UNA USA chapters to host film screenings about human rights. Chapter leaders can find more information by contacting membership at unausa.org or on the Slack channel for UNA leaders. I will post the email address in the chat too, so that you all have access to it. So just sent it in the chat there. Please let me know if you can't see. And finally, thank you all again for joining our International Human Rights Day event. We loved hearing your insights, and we wish you a wonderful rest of your week. Thanks again, and we hope to see you at future UNA USA Human Rights events.
Thank you.